recently here on the air, but I heard a little bit of it en route to my destination. Great job yesterday, Miss Stephanie.
Thank you.
Heard the show. It was beautiful. Miss Hannah's over there, producer Hannah, and we have John Marsh hanging out as well. John, an interesting story about Sheriff John Wheeler arresting an 80-year-old. We'll be talking about that, and 2 counts of attempted murder. That's something else. I mean,
and not just, it's murder for hire, right?
I know.
What's with Mid-Mo lately and these murder and arson for hire things?
John, I think they're watching too much Netflix. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a made-for-TV movie.
I mean, this stuff's unbelievable. Well, I'm glad it was just attempted and not completed. I mean, at least that was good.
And it always shocks me at the price. Like, the price seems so low. It's like, if you're going to do murder, you should have to pay a lot. You're always like, I'll give you $500 to knock off my...
I don't get it.
I don't know.
I don't know. And, of course, today's Super Tuesday. So if Donald Trump sweeps all of the states that are available, he'll come very close to winning. It's all but done at that point. Joe Biden, of course, will clean up big time. So we probably looking at one of the largest and longest general election seasons in history, at least that I can remember.
That sounds so positive on my Tuesday morning.
No, it'll be great. I mean, we'll be able to hash it out over time. And, of course, there'll be more twists and turns in this than Joe Biden has getting off of the stage.
Well, obviously, liberals were completely melting down yesterday after the Supreme Court decision.
And that's the other thing. The Supreme Court decision. Wow. How can they be melting down when it was a unanimous decision?
Well, now they're mad at they're completely mad. I mean, the words that I saw used by some of these liberal pundits against those liberal justices, just awful.
Keith Olbermann wants the Supreme Court dissolved, but Keith Olbermann, he's sort of irrelevant at this point, isn't he?
Yes.
I mean, the liberal justices, too, were kind of grudgingly in agreement. It was the statements they posted after the fact were like, yes, but.
Yeah. And, of course, Jamie Raskin and others are trying to now conjure up a way that Congress can be more strident and have more voice in whether these things can happen. Although, would they be able to make that retroactive even if they passed it tomorrow? It's not going to pass.
Well, in the other scheme I kind of heard for the first time, I think late last night, early this morning, was, okay, so if Congress can actually do this, because that's basically what the court said, Congress can do it, states can't do it, then what if Trump wins and the Democrats control Congress, and then they refuse to count the electors and say, we're using our power to say that he committed an insurrection. And Democrats are now kind of hinting, well, they could probably do that. And I think they need to pass a law. I don't think they could just refuse the electors, but
I don't know.
It's chaotic for sure.
Well, that was the whole argument, too, that it's like, okay, you want to let this stand for these guys. What happens when you're in the majority next time?
Absolutely. I mean, it would have been chaos. You knew that during the arguments, you began to see that, this could just turn into chaos if this is the way we're going to interfere with elections.
I think most reasonable people knew that it was going to be a 9-0 or very, very close. Now, there was some speculation on Twitter that maybe Justice Jackson changed her position very late in the game. But regardless, the main thing is it puts to rest some of these other states. I mean, that's what the liberal justices didn't like. They said you should have exercised judicial restraint and not gone so far. But essentially, this puts to rest not only Colorado, but also Maine, Illinois. I think there are a couple others who are thinking about kicking Trump off the ballot. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's the end of that, at least for now. And if Jamie and all want to try to resurrect this in some future incarnation of congressional removal of people off the ballots because they don't agree with their political ideology, God love you, Jamie. You just got over prostate or some kind of cancer, dude. What in the world? What is wrong with these people? I mean, I got to tell you. By the way, Chris Arps is going to weigh in on this at 6:35. I can't wait to see what Chris has to say about this. Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft to do a little postmortem on the caucuses at 7:10 and to talk about the SCOTUS decision. I guess that shelves any plans he had to take Joe Biden off the ballot, right? Because he threatened to do that if this is going to go up. And then we're going to talk with an Israeli supporter, an activist here in the area who is going to give us a little follow-up. Remember, we talked to one of the Holocaust, the October 7th Holocaust survivors a few weeks ago, and we're going to get a follow-up on that. The pro-Palestinian support is rising in this country. Now polls are saying more than 50% of Americans say enough with the pro-Israeli, Israeli can do no wrong type of sentiment. We need more support for Palestinians. That's going to be an interesting tide. We'll see what Dan Swindell has to say about that. But think about this on a personal level. I've had serious illness. I've had to have my head cracked and half my pituitary taken out in a span of 6 weeks. That humbles you. We all go around through life, and when things are going well, we got a little swagger, got a little bounce in your step. You know what that feels like when you're maybe not on the top of the mountain, but you're up at reasonable altitude. Mm-hmm. And then you get knocked down with an illness, or you have kids. Maybe a kid takes a swoon and has something calamitous happen or worrisome, a diagnosis that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have surgery, even ear tubes, I don't know about you listening there and my friends in the studio. That tends to humble you. That tends to say, hey, wow, there's more to life than my anger, and my vitriol against my political opponents.
Boy, it puts things in perspective.
There you go. And it just, I don't know why it struck me last night that on the heels of a 9-0 decision, Jamie Raskin, fresh off, he's got a new life. His cancer, his hair's back. Oh, how important is that to me? His hair's back. You would think that a man like that would say, okay, they've now set the standard. It's going to be a congressional action, and, let's move on with this election. Just in the face of that, these people have so much hubris. It worries me. The political class in this country, and it's a bipartisan thing, has so much hubris that their personal challenges in an existentially threatening way don't give them pause to think about, my God, there's more than getting Donald Trump off the election, off the ballot. I don't know. I'm sorry for that spin on it, but it struck me.
No, and I think maybe it's a personal crisis for them because they can't possibly think that there are other people out there that don't think exactly like them.
Yes, you're right.
And what they should be doing is, if our guy is so bad and is the end of democracy and is the worst, then it shouldn't be that hard to just win, to beat him. And so if that's the case, and so then, faced with the polling, faced with some of the numbers that, oh my gosh, this guy could, Trump could actually win, and not everyone thinks exactly like I think.
No.
I think it damages their self-esteem or something, and so they're just out of their minds.
Well, and if you think also about, you're so right. I mean, they criticize Donald Trump for talking about nothing. At least he's tacked a little bit away from that. But for the longest time, and I think most of us would say for too long of a time, he couldn't let it go about the 2020 election. And I think now maybe during a speech he will use the word, well, that rigged election, that's it. But he doesn't dwell on it. They're doing the same thing. They are obsessed with J6. They cannot stop thinking about it. And I just don't understand it. Welcome in, Brian Hauswirth. How you do, brother?
It's good to see you. And, the progressives, obviously, they really wanted Ketanji Brown Jackson. And they want, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan and stuff. The key to remember here, folks, 9-0. This is not just Samuel Alito. This is not just Clarence Thomas. Elena Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, I could go down the line, 9-0.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and I think it sets the tone that, hey, they recognize the tripartite nature of this constitutional republic, and that there is an electoral process that has to occur, and that this is a federal office, and the federal rules shall prevail. And you can't have every little angry Secretary of State and partisan cannabis smoking Supreme Court in Colorado. Sorry, I couldn't. Decide that, we're not going to have him on the election. If that happens, all is lost. Might as well move to Argentina, Venezuela.
But here's something else, and I think our listeners are pretty savvy. As optimistic as conservatives are, and this is the irony here, and you and Stephanie and Hannah will get this, and John too. The bottom line is Colorado is not going to vote for Donald Trump. They're not going to vote for Donald Trump. Now, they voted for Ronald Reagan, but the state has that used to be a conservative Republican state. Yep. Our listeners will think, how? Well, it was. Ronald Reagan won it by, I think, 65% of the vote. I mean, it was huge. But the reality is, I don't understand that they were the Colorado wanting to get him off the ballot. He's not going to win that state anyway. I mean, he's just not. I'm not sure there's a Republican out there right now who could win that state. It's pretty blue, but it is interesting.
So what were they afraid of? Right?
I guess maybe they felt like he was a threat. I mean,
14th Amendment.
And they were talking about the exactly. But I mean the reality is he's still not going to win that state, but it's still nonetheless, I think it's a huge decision. And you're right about some of the reaction. People were critical. And keep in mind over the years, folks, there's been a lot of rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court, whether it's this court or other courts that go against conservatives. I mean, you don't win them all. But 9-0 is this was not a 5-4 decision. I think that's significant.
It's something else. And of course, I haven't heard that there were any injuries for roll cart drivers on the first day? Did we have any backing into mailboxes or
no?
Because there is a little maneuvering going on to get the roll cart onto the truck, right?
There have been few issues, and let me just sum it up real quickly. And I was listening, by the way, with the scanner because we did have a lot of heavy wind last night, and some rain, nothing severe. The biggest thing, and Mike Murphy's got a story up, 939theeagle.com, and I hope he put it up on KWAS as well, but 939theeagle.com for sure. He basically interviewed the Columbia Solid Waste, and they are having quite a few issues.
Really?
They had some equipment not come in, and so but what they're doing right now, folks, is they're urging people to be patient. It has not gone as well as they wanted. They've been working on it for a year. Some things didn't come in. People got the wrong carts in some cases, and what they're just asking is patience.
Yeah, you know what?
It's tough.
We started.
Go check your neighbor's front yard if yours is gone.
Think about it. Any new protocol, any new organizational shakeup that you undergo, there's always some fits and starts. I think we have to have a little mercy for them.
We talked about the lines at the caucus this last weekend, and there were some lines and some hiccups and things, but we hadn't done it in a long time.
unwraps it in the Daily DC Rundown.
And I think one of Trump's best legacies are all of the judges he appointed. But of course, yesterday he really didn't need it because it was 9-0. There was some disagreement amongst the justices just about how far the decision goes. But yesterday's decision essentially not only puts the Colorado issue to rest, but also Maine and Illinois as well. And this issue in general, although I'm sure, the liberals' hair is on fire and they're already trying to scheme and plot on ways how to use the decision to potentially against Trump later is what I'm hearing. So interesting day yesterday. Nikki Haley, apparently, today is Super Tuesday. Trump's going to have a very big day, a huge day.
Very Trump-esque of you.
A huge day.
A huge day. It'll be the biggest day.
And Nikki Haley has said before she'd kind of said, I'm going to stick it through Super Tuesday. She hasn't been spending as much money as she probably should have been. So whether or not we get an announcement from her later today or tomorrow, I'd put it at 50-50.
She did have a big win in the swamp, though.
She
beat him in the swamp.
She
She said she beat 14 fellas and has one more fella to beat.
It was a mixed bag of reviews from people after she had won in D.C.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're getting new polling out about Joe Biden. So while he will have a big night tonight, I think his real big night is coming on Thursday and how he performs in the State of the Union. Yesterday there was a new poll. And it said more than 6 in 10 adults doubt Biden's mental capability. And I think those numbers are trending in the wrong direction for Biden, and the party knows it. And so he's got to show up big on Thursday, or I think our friends who think that he's not going to be the candidate might actually be right. Also, this week in D.C., we are expecting a vote from the SEC. This has kind of been an issue that's been trickling along. They had proposed a rule that would require some sort of climate disclosure. It would require publicly traded companies to disclose climate change related information to investors, so you would be more informed about how your investments are being used. And that vote is expected later today. And then also we're getting more and more information about what is in this 1,000-page spending bill that everyone has to vote on by Friday is the deadline for this first tranche of spending bills. There are some things that I think Republicans are pretty mad about. The House Republicans are very mad, but they don't have enough votes to stop it. At the same time, there are some really good cuts. There's some cuts to the FBI. There's some cuts to EPA. And so there are some spending cuts. And actually, Mike Johnson might survive this. Folks are saying he was kind of dealt a bad hand. He's trying to work through it. We got a couple of wins. And they're not, they're not calling for his ouster yet.
I don't care if you're McCarthy or Mike Johnson or Tip O'Neill or the second coming of Jesus Christ. I mean, when you've got a handful, a majority, and you've got a bunch of purple district legislators too in the House, what are you going to do? It's like trying to play a bad hand of cards, right?
It's tough. It's tough. And so I assume as people wade through, I think the 1,000-page bill dropped Sunday night. So
1,000-page. Oh.
Yeah. So as they wade through that, I'm sure we always get some, silly inclusions in there. And that's some of my favorite of this amount for butterfly.
Chris Christie reversed his lap band. A lot of people know about it. He found all of the weight he lost with interest. That's a lot of weight when you think about it. Even Ketanji Brown Jackson, who doesn't know what a woman is, knew that I belong on that ballot, and now they're putting me back on there, and they're going to put my name on that ballot in 24 karat gold. It's going to be incredible. I'm back on the ballot. I'm not going anywhere but the White House, and we will make America great again.
Well, there is Sean Farash, our favorite Trump impersonator, as we bring Chris Arps into the program. Chris, a big day for Donald Trump and doesn't have to worry about Illinois or Maine or Massachusetts or anywhere else now. Welcome in, brother.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, big day yesterday, 9-0 decision, even though 3 of the judges kind of dissented a little bit, but it was kind of a no-brainer situation. Didn't need to be an attorney to figure out that you can't have 50 different states having 50 different criteria for the president of the United States to be on the ballot. So big win for President Donald Trump.
And, of course, today is Super Tuesday, which may turn out to be a yawner if this one goes the way South Carolina and New Hampshire and Iowa and Missouri and Michigan, everyone else went, except for the swamp. Nikki did well in the swamp.
She did. I think she won 60 to 30%. I think the total of people who caucused in D.C. was 2,000, so I didn't know there were that many lobbyists in Washington, D.C., but apparently there are.
That's a good one. Hey, and, we haven't talked about it, but the Supreme Court has basically, put a little stay on the border, I guess the prosecution by Texas of border breakers. So, I mean, there's some movement at the border. That's becoming the preeminent, issue, I think, among even independent voters, certainly among Republican voters. I mean, that is taking top priority, isn't it?
Most definitely. I mean, a Gallup poll came out last week that showed for the first time that illegal immigration was top of mind of the voters, on the top of their mind. It usually has been the economy and national security. So this is a huge issue. It's been President Biden has been in office for 3 years, and he finally found the border last week, along with Donald Trump visiting. This is a huge issue for them, and they know that. And I don't see how they can rectify their position or turn that around in the next 8 months.
I wonder if you saw yesterday, and I haven't brought it up on the show today yet, but to me it was really an interesting thing. A front page article in the Wall Street Journal talks about how latest polling in terms of voters' feelings about Biden's handling of the economy compared to just a couple of months ago has risen by 10 percentage points. And inflation, the view of his inflation problems has, basically moderated. And they were commenting how that really hasn't translated to support for Biden in general. And there's a lot of other polling that continues to show him really suffering. I wonder if they're able, they've been spinning this inflation's down, and hoping people will hear the cost of my groceries is down, which isn't true. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a little smoke cloud on the horizon for Donald Trump?
I don't. I think most Americans realize that the economy is cyclical, and we've been kind of in a downtrend the last few months, couple of years. Regardless of what Joe Biden's policies have been, things have not gotten that much better. So I think they know that this is a cycle. The economy's starting to get better, but I don't believe that they think that Joe Biden's policies have had anything to do with it. And I think a big part of that is because, one, you don't ever see him out really doing the barnstorming type of things that presidents do, especially in an election year. They see a president who looks old, a president who is shuffling, a president that looks like he's over his head. And I think that's a big part of the reason why they don't give him any credit, because he doesn't look presidential. He doesn't look like he's capable of the job.
Can't find his way off the stage without
exactly.
Dr. Jill helping him.
Falling up the stairs, falling downstairs.
That's Chris Arps, talk show host, celebrity on Newsmax, and our guest today on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Chris, talk to us about the whole debate, and I think we talked to you about this recently, was the whole debate over the 14th Amendment and the liberals parading that out. And, it dates back to Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the days after the Civil War and all. And I know, if you read CNN stories on it and, consider the source, they say, it was, designed by the leaders at that time to be forever in place so somebody didn't, go after the government and all that. Mm-hmm. Does it seem like that to you, or it's just an excuse?
Look, I think the main crux of this whole argument of the liberals talking about an insurrection and trying to use the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to Donald Trump because, one, he was never convicted or charged with what's the word there?
Insurrection.
Insurrection, I'm sorry. He was never charged with that. Jack Smith, the special counsel, has charged him with all of these different crimes, but none of them are insurrection. So I think trying to use the 14th Amendment is bogus, and I think most people see that.
Tell us a little bit about
I had a brain fart there.
All good. There's a lot going on this week. Now we had, and I said something earlier about our caucuses and there were some hiccups. I want to say it was county specific. I got notes from the Cole County folks that they were easy peasy in Cole County, no lines. Everyone was running right through. So, I heard there was some contention in and around the St. Louis area in the caucuses. Any takeaways from you from caucuses there in St. Louis?
Yeah, I was in my wife and I are in the 1st Congressional District. We had our caucus at the University of Missouri St. Louis, had about 257 people. It was packed. There were long lines. A lot of people that came to the caucus, the 1st District, had the times wrong for it. A lot of them thought it was 10:30 or later, and they showed up and weren't allowed in. So that was probably the only contentiousness at the 1st District. Now, the 2nd District, my partner Tim Jones on the radio show, he was elected chairman of that. There were
fun in Chesterfield.
Yeah, there were some issues at that caucus. I think over 1,000 people showed up, but I heard that my partner did a good job herding cats. He said he felt like he was back being speaker in the Missouri House. So it all went well. A good turnout for a caucus, especially on a nice Saturday afternoon where it was 75 degrees. And I think we saw democracy in action. And I think, of course, you're going to have a little hiccups. But overall, I think it went well. And I'm sure President Trump is happy with the results here in Missouri.
Have you heard any more from folks about whether or not they want to keep caucusing or whether they want to go back to the presidential preference voting?
I think that with the caucus situation, a lot of people didn't even know that there was a caucus going on Saturday, and that upset a lot of people. And a lot of people, you want to go to your polling place, take 20, 30 minutes, whatever, and vote. They don't want to spend an entire day, 2-3 hours caucusing. So I think this is going to put pressure on the legislature next year or this year in order to bring back the presidential primary.
Where you were, Chris, were there any discussions about, party platform issues or other, non-presidential issues? Because I know a couple of those came up at the Boone County caucus.
We did. The only contentions we had with that were we had changes to the platform, but we didn't know how many. And so there was a vote in order to just send it along to the next process, instead of voting on each single one. And a lot of people got a little irritated about that. But other than that, it was pretty smooth sailing.
Chris, what this promises, after today, on both the Democrat and the Republican side, this promises to be a done deal, unless, of course, the wild card of someone to slip in and save, the Democrats from Joe Biden. This promises to be the longest general election that we've had in a long time. Normally, the nomination process isn't complete until, late spring, early summer, right? May, early June. Mm-hmm. How does that? Do you think that plays in favor of Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever supplants Joe Biden?
I think it definitely plays for President Trump, because now he has dispatched Nikki Haley early, and he's got the next 6 or 7 months of just being able to just hammer Joe Biden over and over and over. So I think in the long run, this is good for President Trump. And, he has said last week that, and his handlers have said that he's going to shift away from criticizing Nikki Haley and is going to have all of his focus on Joe Biden, which I think that's bad for him because, as I stated earlier, he doesn't look like he's capable of doing the job. Immigration and is a top issue for Americans, and there doesn't seem to be any real solutions that he is offering. And I think Donald Trump's going to be able to just hammer him for the next 7 or 8 months on those issues, and that's not good for him, for Biden.
Chris, what happens to Nikki Haley? Does she bail out tomorrow?
I don't know. Nikki Haley in February, she raised $12 million. She still has a bunch of billionaires, Texas billionaires, that are supporting her. Now, they may drop off now that she's going to probably get shellacked in Super Tuesday, but she still has a little money left. And I think as long as she has some money, and I think it'll also depend on after Super Tuesday today, how much money does she raise afterwards? If she raises $1 million like she did last week after one of the elections,
I feel terribly empty when I'm not here with our family that texts us at 573-874-9390 and the people in studio, and it's a great group.
Did you like the special playlist?
Yeah, wonderful.
I felt outnumbered.
Yeah,
And they were on fire yesterday. They had some good, funny baby names.
Nice.
That were.
Yeah, it's a TikTok trend right now to talk about words in the English language that have a weird meaning that you wouldn't necessarily name a child because of the meaning behind it.
Oh.
But if there was no meaning behind it, would maybe make a good name.
So the one that's trending, Hannah, is
felony.
But Michael texted in uranium. Like, that's kind of cute. Like if
I like alimony.
Alimony is pretty good.
There was Randy, you'll appreciate this one. There was a NICU nurse that texted us and said that one of the moms that she knew tried to name the baby meconium.
Oh, meconium.
The nurses, I think, talked her out of it, or the grandma.
Newborn poop? That's the meaning of your name. Oh, my God. Sort of sounds like something on the periodic table, but no, it's not one of the elements. It's the green slime. It's like...
It's no bueno.
Ninja Turtle stuff.
And then we talked about the best call-ins for excuses to get out of work. And Patricia, who had to basically fight off a skunk in her garage to get to work, I think probably had the best one, because honestly, if you get sprayed by the skunk and then you show up to work, that's bad for everybody. So I'd prefer
unless you're collecting roll cards.
There you go.
Now, humor me along here.
Oh, boy.
Can we agree that Donald Trump exerts some wonderful qualities of leadership? Eternal optimism, right? No, I mean, that's a wonderful, right? Leaders, the sky could be falling, but leaders should remain optimistic.
Yes.
He's always positive. He's very, I think he's at the right time when people are incoming into his organization. He lifts them up, right? And gives them a nice boost. They're the best chief of staff you're ever going to see. It's the most wonderful Secretary of State, the greatest, and then on the back end, not so much. But I mean, there's a lot of good leadership things. He has humor.
I think he showed loyalty to people who've been super loyal to him.
For about 5 minutes.
Well,
and then...
sometimes. I mean, if you're a true Trump person, he will support you until you say anything negative.
Yeah, right.
But you're right. Humor is an important one.
He keeps you engaged, right? He's apparently in person. He's charming. He's charismatic. He's just charming. You want to be around him. Okay.
And he tells everyone.
He's an alpha male, right? That's opposed to people on the left. So I'm sorry, all you Democrats out there. I'm not demeaning you, but you might have your testosterone levels checked. I'm just saying, if you're a guy and you're on the left, if you're progressive.
Wow.
I'm kidding. Jake Tapper pulled the biggest Freudian slip ever, and I think it really supports my theory that lefties may have a little envy for Donald Trump's alpha male status. And here goes.
Explanation was not they didn't like Donald Trump. They said he participated in an erection, and I have to an insurrection. An insurrection, and I have to say I got up at 5 this morning to do Casey Hunt's show, and I'm exhausted.
He's talking with Nikki Haley.
Explanation was not they didn't like Donald Trump. They said he participated in an erection, and I have to an insurrection. An insurrection, and I have
Nikki
to say I got
Haley
up at 5
does
this
not
morning to
even,
do Casey Hunt's show, and I'm exhausted.
Nikki Haley's just deadpan.
Yeah,
she's just sitting there. I thought that was hilarious, and I thought, I'm Jake. I'm sorry. I think there's subliminal Freudianism going on there. Yeah?
And
little envy.
In 2020, there was a former Zimmer team member who, instead of election coverage, said erection coverage.
Yeah.
Two very different things.
Now, that wouldn't apply to the former team member.
No.
But
I cannot speak for that.
Yeah.
And to quote Donald Trump on Celebrity Apprentice, "You're fired."
But the best part of that clip, video-wise, was, she just sort of sat there with this, like, now what do I say? She sort of has that very uncomfortable grin, What do I do?
And that's the difference between her and Donald Trump, because she just sat there silent. Trump would have acknowledged and been like, I do have a problem with, too many or something.
Right.
He would have made light of it and acknowledged it, and everyone would have had a good laugh and moved on. And she was just like frozen. And that's what makes him kind of,
Trump would have been
so
like,
great.
Look at
He'd
my
have
hands.
referenced
Look at
Stormy
my big
Daniels,
hands. He'd have made something fun out of it and humorous,
Yeah.
Well, he retired. That sounds
Did I
nicer.
say retired? Did I say resign?
Yeah.
Retired. I'm thinking politics here. He retired. And there was speculation that maybe Travis was going to do that, but Jason did. I've heard that. You haven't heard that there was some speculation about that?
No, I hadn't heard that one.
Well, I've been looking at my TikTok feed.
John, had you heard that one?
John, you've heard that, haven't you?
Well, they floated it out there, but it didn't. Jason, yeah. Travis, no way.
Well, I don't know, man. If I was Travis, I think walk into the sunset being Taylor Swift's roadie, chief roadie. Would there be a better gig in the world?
Probably not.
Visit places all over the world. I don't know. John, I'd take that gig, wouldn't you? If
Sounds like Travis. a lot of lifting and toting.
Yeah, and Travis is probably
he's
up
a big
to
dude,
that.
though.
he's up to that. Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft is going to join us in a minute to talk about the just completed caucuses as we and the SCOTUS decision yesterday, keeping Donald Trump on the ballot in Colorado, and certainly, I think, shuttling any plans that, well, there were more than a couple of states. Illinois had already made move that way, so had Maine, and others were talking about it. That's not going to happen, though, we hope. So, hopefully.
Illinois?
Yeah, well, that's right, Illinois and Maine, and I think Michigan had talked about it as well. But I don't know. We had a texter, and by the way, the text line are, if you want to call, 573-874-9390. Very interesting question by one of our listeners that asked, what happens? I mean, it's a question, I think, a general question that we've been talking about since 2020. What is the process if there is a legitimate question with the vote or of an elected candidate? Well, I think we had legitimate questions, and that was of some concern. So we'll ask Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft, not only from the Missouri point of view, but maybe from the national point of view, because I'm sure he rubs shoulders with all his other SOSs out there. Welcome to the program, Jay.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, what is your take on the Supreme Court decision yesterday? 9-0. I mean, it was definitive, no doubt about it, that he's going to stay on the ballot.
It was. I was concerned that it might not be a unanimous verdict. I think the concurrent decisions are why it took longer and why we actually got to a 9-0. I also think that's probably why it was a per curiam decision that wasn't signed by the Chief Justice. But this is what I've been saying all along, that the states don't have the right to do this. Clearly, they read the brief that I filed, and 10 other Secretaries of State joined me on, showing that Congress has to act if this is going to be able to be done. They have not. Therefore, what Colorado, what Maine, and, of course, Illinois tried to do were wrong. And thankfully, they stopped the chaos that would have come from it.
Yeah. And, you're right. I mean, it would have just opened the floodgates for so much, not only in Democrat states now, but certainly then I guess Republicans would have been invited to do the same, right? It would have just been absolute banana republic style, jettisoning your political opponent off the ballot. Would have been a disaster.
It would have been a disaster, would have torn our country apart. I mean, you would have seen probably California throwing Republicans off the ballot in Republican congressional districts. You would have seen Republican states throwing Democrats off the ballot in Democratic congressional districts. I mean, if those are the rules, you have to play by them. That's why I was so grateful that the Supreme Court stopped it, and that's why I was so happy to lead a group of Secretaries of State to explain exactly why they had to.
Yeah. Jay, I saw something this morning on Fox News as I was getting ready to come into the show. They were doing the diner thing, and a lot of the people, I forget which state it was in, it was one of the Super Tuesday states, had already early voted. And you were talking about playing by the rules. I mean, clearly, because of weather circumstances and voter machine alleged malfunctioning, I'm thinking down in Arizona, weather up in Nevada in 22. Boy, it was a disaster area. And is this the election where, even though we may not like the rules, the conservatives/Republicans, it's a wise thing to do? And where do you stand on that in general? And where are we in Missouri on early voting?
Look, I like the idea of going in person and voting on Election Day. That's the gold standard of how to run elections. But if there's a choice between people mailing in absentee ballots or having to go in person and prove their identity with a government-issued photo ID, that's much better. What I'm reminding people is that in Missouri, if you have an excuse, you can vote absentee. and you can do it in person, so you don't have to rely on the U.S. Post Office. You don't have to make sure you send it to the right place. You got there in time. I am encouraging every Missourian that can to go in person to vote. If they need to vote early because they have a reason or something like that, we have 2 weeks of no excuse early voting as long as it's in person. I'm requesting every Missourian go in person, show that photo ID, and know that their ballot will count.
All right. Well, and again, I think, Missouri is increasingly unique among the states that continue to liberalize those things. And I know a lot of us just really hate to see that being the rule of the road in so many states. But, I guess if that's the way it's going to be in those states, it's the wise thing to do. We're talking with Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft this morning on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Jay, we heard from the Missouri Republican Party denouncing the candidate for same race you're in for Missouri governor. This Darrell McClanahan described himself as pro-white, has some KKK ties. What would be the procedure to take this person off the ballot if we're talking about, things in D.C. along those lines?
Well, since he's already filed, the party gave him a filing receipt, and he appeared before my office with everything that the law required. To remove him from the ballot, the party will need to file in the circuit court, asking him to be removed, saying that they do not want to associate with him. That's part of their First Amendment right to decide who they want to associate with and who they don't want to associate with. If they file that, the judge will grant it. It is not for me to take someone off the ballot. We saw how bad that can be with what Colorado, Maine, and Illinois did. But our office will just go before the court and say, tell us what we should do, and we will do it.
And ultimately, Secretary, it would be up to the judge, correct? The Cole County Circuit Judge.
The law is clear.
Yeah.
The law is clear. If they ask for it, if the party says this is why we don't want to associate with them, that's their right, and of course the judge will allow it.
Mr. Secretary, I want to shift the focus just a little bit, and I really appreciate the information on the early voting and the information about, obviously, the Supreme Court is huge. Randy was there last week. I was there last week to cover it, the Midway Golfing Games. It was the Lincoln Days, Boone County, and you were standing. Yeah. You were standing next to the door. I was standing next to the door. Literally standing room only. People literally lined up out the door, and in some cases in the corner and everywhere else. It's probably the biggest crowd I've seen. One of the things you said, Mr. Secretary, when you spoke from the podium, you talked about the issue of education, and you said it's important for parents to be basically in control and not the schools and the school board. If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in local control. And far too often we have Republicans that say local control is a school board. I'm not inherently against school boards, but the best local control is mom and dad. No one knows a child better than their parents. The administrators and principal of the school don't. I want parents in charge so they can make sure that their kids are being taught, that they can make sure their kids are in an environment that is conducive to that child learning. Every child is different. They're not widgets off an assembly line. Some learn better visually. Some learn better auditory. And we need parents to be able to make that decision. Fewer than 25% of Missouri 8th graders are proficient in math and reading. I didn't say calculus and Greek. I said math and reading. We've got to make a change. It's a moral imperative, and we do it by putting parents in charge.
Secretary, we've had a couple of texts that really raise some fundamental questions about election integrity. One of them said, what if there is some suspicion, as there was in 2020, that there was some tomfoolery going on, not in Missouri, but in other jurisdictions? But then an interesting text just came in. Is it possible to require each polling location to notify all the poll workers of that precinct's voting results before they send it to the main office, just to make sure there's no changing of the totals? As you can see, there's just an awful lot of concern about how many nodes of opportunity are there for election fraud. I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous question, but it has to be asked.
Well, it's a concern because we saw what other states did. We saw Pennsylvania just blatantly ignore its constitution. We saw Wisconsin with the drop boxes ignore their statutes. And there are a lot of things that I wish the legislature would pass so that I could enforce. Local election authorities don't technically work for me. They are elected in their own right. But we ought to have the legislature pass common sense legislation that would require not just someone to say they're a citizen, but proof of citizenship to vote. We should have the legislature pass legislation that would make it so that no matter where you live or how many houses you have or places you can claim, there is one and only place that you can be registered to vote in. We should have the legislature, I wish they would, go ahead and pass some more expansive audit language to require that our audits are done by hand counting so that we have the benefits and detractions of both machines and hand counting so we have layered defenses. And, of course, we ought to have a way when something weird happens already set up in stone to say, wait a minute, something weird happened. We need to do a deep dive of this election and check these results. I will say we have implemented requirements with election authorities for them to provide us with more information so we close the loop on how many ballots were sent, how many were received, how many were spoiled, how many were counted, that sort of thing. But there's always things we can do better. But really, we're at the limit of what we can until the legislature actually does their job.
And Randy, I want to point out something for our listeners. We had a lot of listeners, the secretary just referred to it, who were at the Boone County Lincoln Days. But Shane Scholler, you were standing right next to him. He said when he was the Greene County clerk, there was someone who voted twice in his county.
That's right.
And according to him, he confirmed it. He didn't name the person. He didn't give a whole lot of detail, but he said the person was prosecuted.
Yeah,
he did say
that. Before we let you go, your reaction to the just completed caucuses on Saturday throughout Missouri?
You know, they probably weren't quite as smooth as elections run by the Secretary of State's office, but I love the idea of getting together with fellow Missourians and for me it was Cole County Missourians, and discussing and making the decision. You know, at our caucus, we actually chose our own slate. We didn't go with the slate that the establishment had set up. We, the people that showed up on that day, said, wait a minute. We want to choose who will represent us further on and help pick the nomination for the president. We were able to do that. It was a collegial, friendly atmosphere. It was a wonderful thing. I fully enjoyed it and was glad to see real democracy in action.
And, you know, I heard Mayor Ron Fitzwater on the program yesterday. I was out, but I was on the road. And, you know, he lamented the fact that the people that, you know, from his perspective, the people that sort of took for granted that the status quo was going to happen and the slated ballot was going to be passed. Well, it didn't happen. And I think that really speaks to democracy in action, right? Where as one of as our former host here said, the more localer, the more importanter, right? And I think that that really admonishes people to show up and get active if you're concerned.
First off, I want to thank the mayor for presiding over the caucus, for doing what he did. I thought he did a good job. It's something that he had no experience doing. I thought he was fair and even-handed. I really appreciated that. And then, you know, speaking with regard to the slate, it wasn't that we had something necessarily against the people that were on the pre-prepared slate, but we just wanted the people that were actually there. I think a lot of people did not like the idea of picking as delegates people that didn't even take the time to caucus for Donald Trump on Saturday. And I think that's why we won, you know, I think it was 130 to 53 with our slate.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see. It's good to see democracy in action. And as you said, it remained collegial, and that's always important. And you're right. Mayor Ron Fitzwater always does a fabulous job, whether he's emceeing the Cole County Lincoln Days or managing the caucus. Hey, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate all your analysis. Look forward to the next conversation.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too. There he is, Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. Coming up.
a little flattery to try to.
I'm serious. No, it's like a box of chocolates. Never know what you're going to get.
Now, I know Stephanie really loves it when I cover, airline related stories.
Oh, no.
I think because it unlocks new fears for her, right? She travels on airplanes quite a bit, has plenty of travel related mishap stories.
Yeah.
Pit bulls.
Yes, pit bulls, delayed flights, the whole gambit, right?
Sure.
And a couple of months ago, I shared a story about a gentleman who got trapped in the bathroom.
I remember. Yeah.
I think I'd rather be sitting in the chair where their door got sucked out than be trapped in the bathroom.
Yeah, so he had to communicate with the...
You're right.
Yeah, he had to communicate with the flight attendants by sliding a piece of paper under the door, I guess. He was trapped in there for quite a while.
Where did he get the piece of paper? Because I was just in the airport bathroom and I thought, how would I communicate with
It's a whole
people?
roll of it right there, isn't there?
But did he have a pin?
That's true.
Did he have
Maybe you don't want to know stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was in the...
There are pigmented materials you could write a message.
Okay. Anyway, that was in India, that story.
Oh, my goodness.
But it happened again.
What are we going to do?
And it happened in the U.S. It was Delta Airlines. It was a flight going from Salt Lake City to New Orleans. And a gentleman by the name of Brent told his wife he was going to visit the laboratory. And when he got in there, he was in there for a long time. And the wife was getting aggravated because she had their 2-year-old and their 4-year-old all by herself.
And he's sitting in there on his phone.
Yeah, that was naturally where her brain went.
Mm-hmm.
After about 5 minutes. And then another 5 went by. And that's when they made an announcement on the overhead saying that someone was stuck in the bathroom and the facilities were no longer available, basically, which is mortifying, right?
Wow.
Eventually, more and more of the flight staff chipped in on trying to get this guy out. And the pilot
We'd envision making the winning plays day after day on Kohler Ridge Road. We won countless Super Bowls in our minds before ever leaving the house.
Poor guy.
Oh,
Man.
And he was looking right at Travis, and Travis raises his sunglasses and is wiping away tears, and their mom is sitting right there.
I'm talking about one of the most poignant retirement statements and speeches I can remember in a long time. Jason Kelce, 13 years with the Philadelphia Eagles, entire career playing center for the Eagles, and retired yesterday. And this guy is really, I mean, that speech was an all-American love story, right? I mean, for his wife, his kids, and about being a dad. And I must say, well, John, I'll speak for myself, not for you or Brian. If that little, was it during the playoff game when he did the visual anthem to Dad Bod? I mean, we got to thank Jason for that, don't we? That was an anthem to the Dad Bod. I mean, I love that guy. It was great.
Well, and he goes on, he's addressing his wife, talking about all the things that they've accomplished in their years together. And he goes on to talk about the importance of being a dad. And here's a little bit on that.
I am a product of my upbringing. I think one of the best things a person can be in this world is a father. A father who is present, loving, devoted, just may be the greatest gift a child could ask for in our society. And I have a damn good one. My father believed in me more than anyone.
So he transitioned from talking about his girls to his dad, and he kind of gave everyone in his family a little tender moment in his retirement speech, and it's really touching. A lot of the clips kind of made me tear up yesterday, I'm not going to lie.
No, I have to tell you, I was touched by that. I really was. It was an amazing talk. And, this is a time in America when it's not happened now, but it's happened over decades. We've seen the erosion of the traditional American family. This is not to in any way judge people who struggle to raise children in a single-parent household, but this is an eternal truth. He spoke eternal truth yesterday. This should be an aspirational goal of every mom and dad, to raise kids that feel as though you were present and that you loved and you cared and you gave, and then that'll be carried forward. I mean, you'll see that. We say that in our kids' lives. I mean, I wasn't as present as I'd like to have been. Thank God my wife was able to stay home most of the time and work, but one of us was there and picked up the slack when the other, and that's the beauty of a two-parent household. You're a busy woman. Your husband's a busy, but you guys are there when the other aren't there, and that's the magic of the nuclear family. Right, Steph?
Yeah, I think it's important. And I mean, we have the privilege of having grandparents very close as well.
Yeah.
And so
we did too.
That certainly helps. I think the other thing, I think his comments on parenting were really beautiful, and his tributes to all of his family members. But I also saw a tweet yesterday, and I don't know where they were, but it looks like kind of like a cafeteria or a meeting room, and all of his team members were all sitting there. And the tweet said, "You never see this." And they were all watching him on the big screen, and they said it was pure silence except for some sobbing. And so to have that respect among everyone that you played with, even folks within the NFL were saying this is rare, and so what a nice tribute to him and to his career yesterday.
Well, and he took it tough too, through his career. I know he talked about it during that documentary that he did with Travis about tearing up his MCL a couple of times, and said it was getting tougher and tougher every year to play the game, being down there in the trenches as a starting center for 13 seasons.
Yeah, that's tough in the trenches. Wow, that is tough down there.
Yeah, the Chiefs even posted on their Facebook page, and they captioned a photo of Travis and Jason kind of embracing, and it says, "You never played for us, but you're still family. The game is going to miss you, Jason. Congratulations on a legendary career." I thought that was
isn't
sweet.
That something?
But no, the Kelce brothers are getting a lot of credit online, and this isn't the first time I've seen this, but more so after yesterday's announcement. They're getting a lot of credit for kind of breaking the stereotype of a burly dude, right? They many times over the last couple of years, they haven't been afraid to let their emotions show whether that be crying or being angry, whatever. On the podcast, they've shed many tears. And it's showing that men are allowed to be vulnerable, which of course we know. But sometimes the stereotype of these big burly dudes is that they're supposed to be super tough and not let anything get to them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people on the internet are hailing the Kelsey brothers for being emotionally available, I think is, as one Twitter user put it.
And in these times where, the family's been redefined and often it's mom and, 3 kids or 2 kids or 1 kid but this really is a call to action for folks who are, somehow in that sphere of influence of that type of a family situation where usually it's statistically a mom raising kids independently. It's important for uncles to step up and grandpas to step up and be that male influence in the family, right? I mean, I think that's really important. And we see that through programs, formal programs such as Big Brothers, Big Sisters, right? When just sort of fill in that missing piece of the puzzle in terms of what sociologically is the ideal situation. And he said, what he said is so important. And I think we look back at our parenting when he said being present is so important. And I'm reminded of what a counselor once told me as a dad who always wanted to fix things. It's like, just be there. Just be there. And it sounds like he was there for his kids, even though, the life of an NFL guy during the season is probably not there a whole lot, because of the rigorous training and the travel and everything.
Well, and we've seen Jason say over the last few years that he still wants to be able to be dad, right? He will know when to hang it up, basically when it starts having an impact on how he's able to be dad.
Yeah.
And he wants to protect his body so that he can still be dad. He can get in the floor and play with his kiddos. He can hold the baby without his back hurting. Yeah. All things that have been said in the Kelsey documentary. So he talks about in his speech as well, just the time off the field with his girls is becoming more and more important to him as time goes on. Yeah. And it's sort of eclipsing the football field.
Well, let's be honest. He's fortunate enough to probably have a little bit of a stash in the bank to be able to do that at a young age and be with his young kids. A lot of guys
He's
have
made
to
some
work
comments too about maybe wanting to stay with the organization in a coaching, management, scout capacity.
Well, and not to keep talking about the documentary, this isn't an ad for the Kelsey documentary. But it talks about how he has always been mindful of finding other ways to make income outside of football. So he's been prepping to leave football for several years. He's starting to get into the cattle industry.
Really?
Believe it or not. He has 50 or 100 head of cattle in Missouri that he owns, and he's very interested in getting into that.
Looks like a guy who'd eat up all the profits, though.
Maybe he'll get into the healthy cattle industry and do grass-finished cattle.
Okay, here we go.
I will tell you, though, and all of you guys out there who when you were younger, or maybe you are younger, and you have a lot of ambition, or you had a lot of ambition, and you weren't there, you tell me if one of the most poignant songs you hear, because, man, it brings me to tears when I hear it, is Cats in the Cradle. That song just brings me to tears. It brings me to my knees. Because I was so busy in the first years, especially of my son, and I look back and I go, man, I tell young dads, it's like, hey, don't do what I did. Take the time to be there. Be there. It's really important. All right, and I've tried to make up for it with my son because that's when I was the busiest and was not as much there. But yeah, I am so proud of my 3 kids because they are successful, independent kids, and I think that's what we all aspire to. Jason Kelsey, I'm sure, is going to be doing that with his kids and making sure they're successful. So is Stephanie Bell, right?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with 2 working parents, and it wasn't a choice. And I like to remind myself, I watched a lot of TV, and I think I turned out okay. So, I mean, I think parents can really get a lot of guilt and get down on themselves for having to, work or be gone. And I think, there are good lessons that come from kids watching 2 parents work. I think
that's right.
Well.
No, that's the good part of that. You set that example of that work ethic, which is so very important, and I think lost on a lot of folks as well.
Your dad set a high bar for you listening to the radio all those years.
He used to listen all the time to John Marsh. He has been a lifelong, and I remember as a little girl growing up and hearing John Marsh on the radio. So
there you go.
But as a small business owner, I mean, it mattered, right? And being involved in the local community, and radio played a big part in my dad's business. I know.
And that old-fashioned mantra of provision and security as the prime responsibility of the parents, so important, and how those provision and security metrics balance out between the two. That's in flux. It's worked out.
Right now, my son is convinced he's like in a baseball card selling business with his friend. He's got spreadsheets and stuff. They've learned how to use Canva. I hear the student government elections are coming up, and we're going to run for student government.
We are good,
apparently. So I mean, so it's exciting to see them kind of get their own interests and be motivated by some of the things that you're doing. Potentially to learn themselves and to do.
I imagine he's going to have to do a speech when he's running for that. I know someone that might be able to help him with that.
I know there are posters involved, but other than that, I haven't heard a whole lot.
He can hand out 62 Roger Maris cards to all his potential supporters.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Oh, boy. And there was that dad bod moment. Thank you, Jason Kelsey. You vindicated all of us. All right. What you got on your plate, John, when we come back?
How about Just Glad to See Me 2.0?
Oh, I can't
of pills in his sock. He told them simply he uses a Percocet for pain from a bullet lodged in his spine. But officers said he tensed up while they were being searched in his groin area, and they asked if he had anything, so to speak, stuffed in his shorts. Our corrections officers refer to that as keystring. He said he did not. When they arrived at the station, Boyd was seen to be walking with a limp and appeared to be clenching his buttocks. So a trip through the scanner identified a foreign object, which turned out to be a Smith & Wesson handgun, about 5 inches in length, stashed in his nether regions. Not reported whether it was loaded. He also had 2 plastic bags of marijuana tucked in next to his boys. In defense of Boyd, the manufacturer Smith & Wesson in the ad does claim the pistol is, quote, perfectly suited for concealed carry. Now you know the rest of that story.
Oh, my goodness. Oh,
I just don't understand these criminals these days. And we don't know the details yet, John, of this latest murder for hire, but I don't think what the number was. And that's what I want to know is how much did they offer to pay these people to knock off 2 of their family members, right?
Don't you watch enough crime reality shows to know that you don't get away with this stuff?
You would think, but we had the realtor lady at the lake a couple years ago. Then we had the arson for hire, allegedly, here in Colombia by the, I think the Mexican restaurant owner. And now we've got this one, the latest one.
Well, some criminals are incredibly smart, but psychopathic, and others are just stupid, right? It seems to be both ends of the spectrum, right? I mean, because you look at, especially a lot of these white-collar criminals, I mean, smart people, but just terribly misguided.
Maybe they're like Hannah, and like John said, they just listen to too many, like, true crime podcasts.
Okay, I don't listen to those because I'm doing research, all right? It's just...
Oh, you're doing research.
No, I'm saying I'm not doing
you're not
research.
doing
Simply for entertainment.
Exactly.
Well, and it's the ones, I mean, speaking of research, there's lots of the ones where they're like, how to do a crime on their Google. You know, they go and look at the Google history and they're like, poison, you know.
Kohlberger.
Yeah,
the guy up there, I mean, what in the heck was he thinking? He's not the first one where they're searching online for MOs of what they're going to do. Are you kidding me? I don't get it.
Let me think back to the mid-Missouri James Cowan case where he was convicted of poisoning his wife with antifreeze, and they looked at his personal computer and found searches how to poison somebody.
It's just crazy.
If you're going to poison someone, use your Encyclopedia Britannica or something, right? Use a book. Go to the library.
But you know what's scary about that? So when we, here we are on a talk format, we do a lot of research into some pretty nefarious things, right? We're researching pedophiles, and right? I mean, that's part of what you're doing. And I'm thinking, someone's watching. The NSA is watching what I'm doing.
What are these people up to? Yeah,
so are our engineers. By the way,
I clicked on a no website once, and it blocked me on there, and it was real mad. And
then I convinced her to go tell on herself.
Oh no. The George Washington move.
It was a year-end recap of what people were searching.
Yeah, well,
and I thought when I clicked it, it would go to like an article, not to necessarily that site, and that site is blocked here.
Oh.
Apparently people are really into grannies or something. It was some article, and I was trying to find the year-end recap, and I found the wrong thing.
I basically convinced her that the engineers get a real-time notification like on their phones.
Oh, no, you didn't.
That someone tried to access that website, and so
You spoofed her with that?
I did.
But if you've ever worked with like people in banking, like people in financial institutions, there are like flags, and if you send the wrong thing through the email, their people get a notice. So I've seen that, I've witnessed that before. So I was fully convinced, but I had...
Which is why I just get the biggest kick out of the paranoia, legitimate, so it's not paranoia, but the 24/7 compliance hysteria that people in the medical industry have about HIPAA security. And I just laugh. I like, you think that your medical records are private? You got to be kidding.
Now I'm freaked out. What?
Medicare knows, Medicaid knows, United Healthcare knows. They know everything that goes on with you.
Prescription
weekend here. We're going to have a long election season. It's going to be, well, at least for the near term, Biden versus Trump. And Joe Biden has both feet, 1 foot in each canoe when it comes to the Palestinian and the Israeli crisis. So joining us to give us an update on that is pro-Israel advocate from the area, Dan Swindell. How you doing, Dan? Welcome to the program.
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
All right. And recently you introduced us to, and listeners heard, a man who was on tour. His name was Gal Cohen-Salal. He and his wife and 3 kids were in a safe space in their kibbutz house just right on the Gaza-Israeli border. They were there during the October 7th attack. It was a dramatic interview. People can catch it from a couple weeks ago here on our Facebook page, on the archives. But he's been on tour. Give us a little update on what kind of resistance and headwinds he has encountered along the way.
Yeah, so Gal Cohen-Salal was an Israeli who survived the October 7th attack. The October 7th attack was when about 2,000 Hamas fighters broke through the Israeli border fence and invaded Israel and kidnapped and murdered 1,200 Israelis and took 240 hostage. Gal was on a speaking tour. He survived the attack. Here in Colombia, he did not face much resistance. But when he went to Kansas City University, there were protests, and they released a statement describing him as an illegal settler. But actually, Gal lives inside of the state of Israel. He lives right on the border of Gaza. They generally try to claim that they're only describing people who live in the, quote, West Bank as illegal settlers, but they released a statement saying, cancel this illegal settler who's a person that lives in Israel. So it shows you that they actually believe that any Jewish people living anywhere in the land of Israel are illegal.
From
They're
the
an
river to the
person.
sea. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to local and regional news. I was walking down Broadway just a couple of weeks ago, and right there by City Hall, there were a couple of protesters on the corner. This was at 6 o'clock in the evening, pro-Palestinian protesters. I would say advocates. They had signs out. They were chatting. They weren't rambunctious. They weren't, confrontational. But I've certainly seen, both at the university and just in general, a lot more pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas support than I have pro-Israel. You seem to be the lone pro-Israel advocate standing. What's going on?
Well, I do think that I believe you that there's been a lot more visual support for the Palestinians on campus and around town. That's run by a group called Students for Justice in Palestine and a little bit by a group called Mid-Missouri Peace Works. They have a store downtown called Peace Nook. I actually challenged the director of the Peace Nook to a debate. His name is Mark Heim, on the subject of whether calling for the ceasefire brings peace, and he flatly turned me down. So he was unwilling to debate the truth, the truth of his claims. But there is a lot of visual support. I think they get a lot of young people, and they pump them up with the message that they're fighting evil and they're fighting for injustice and things like that.
What about on the campus itself, the University of Missouri campus? I mean, other campuses across the nation have seen sometimes violent protests, sometimes against places, sometimes against people. I think of it, was it Yale, where they were banging on the door of the library and the Jewish students were basically held hostage?
Yeah, there's actually been multiple situations like that on multiple campuses. There was just a situation where all of the Jewish students, I think Berkeley, where they were moved, they literally had to be taken out of a room, moved down a hall, and taken to a different building because the protesters outside were so violent, which to me is completely unacceptable. It's unbelievable that the campus police don't remove the people attacking the Jewish students, but rather move the Jewish students.
All right. Now, you sent me a story that Girl Scouts were told to stop bracelet-making fundraiser for kids in Gaza. Now they can't keep up. What's that all about?
Well,
this was in Missouri.
This was in Missouri.
What the heck?
So there was a situation where a Girl Scout troop tried to raise some money for they say starvation in Gaza, and they were told that it was there. Well, actually, when I ran into it, there were possibly some violations of the rules of the Girl Scouts. But they were trying to say, oh, we're being persecuted, and then a bunch of people came to the rescue and they started selling even more bracelets.
All right. Finally, latest polls say that a majority of Americans now support the Palestinians and want some kind of at least humanitarian relief, to be very strident, and for Israel to stand down in one way or another. It seems as though the message is resonating more on that side of this issue than it is on the pro-Israeli side. Have the Israelis overstepped their welcome in terms of public support nationally and internationally?
Well, if they have, then it's sadly only with people who don't understand the situation.
Okay.
So Hamas is a radical Islamic terrorist organization. I think sometimes those words are used so much that people forget the full meaning of them. And they are absolutely committed to the destruction of Israel. And that is their sole goal. If you leave Hamas in power, then they will only use the situation to rebuild their armory. They will only regroup, and they will just prepare for the next war. So as long as they are in power, then they will only be planning for the next war. So if you call for a ceasefire, then you're actually calling for them to stay in power. And as long as Hamas is in power, then we will continue to have this war in this situation. So Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. It's almost 20 years, which means that Israel has not gone back into Gaza for almost 20 years. Israel has been trying to deal with Hamas by not going in in the ground and taking them out for almost 20 years. Israel has now decided that time period of just letting them stay on the border is no longer acceptable. They are going to go in and take them out. Every call for a ceasefire just postpones the goal of taking them out of power. And if you don't take them out of power, this is just going to continue. So on the surface, they say, oh, well, why don't you care about the Palestinian civilians? Why aren't you trying to help them? And my answer is that I am actually the compassionate person, because I want to end the situation that's causing their suffering, which is Hamas being in power, whereas you want to keep Hamas in power, which means that you want to continue the suffering of the Palestinians. So I'm actually the person that wants compassion for the Palestinians. Take Hamas out of power, solve the problem, solve it once and for all, and be done with it. Don't keep saying 2 weeks to take them out of power, 4 weeks to take them out of power. Be done with it.
Fair to say that the people who might be sympathetic on American campuses and otherwise to the anti-fascist movement are supporting a fascist movement called Hamas?
They're supporting a very...
Is there some irony there? I mean,
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of manipulation, and it actually gets very, very deep. In the West, a lot of Palestinians will go to people like African-American students, and they'll say, oh, Israel is a white state, and they're oppressing brown and black bodies. They'll present a message like that. Back in the Middle East, the message is, we believe that we have to bring the Islamic kingdom called the Caliphate and destroy Israel. So there's two different messages. And what happens is there's fundamentally two different presentations with the entire Palestinian message. In America, it's all about social justice and rights. In the Middle East itself, it's all about Islamic supremacy over the state of Israel. And so they present this message over and over to students who don't know the other side of it, and they do fall for it. And that makes sense. Students want to do something good. But the important thing is to just keep putting out the truth of the situation.
That's Dan Swindell. He's a local pro-Israeli advocate. He joins us here on Wake Up Mid-Missouri this morning.
Dan, any great surprise for you that the UN team has now said they found, I think their words were clear and convincing information, that the hostages in Gaza were and presumably are being sexually abused?
The stories of what's happening to the hostages is just unbelievable. I don't know that I want to repeat some of the things that I've heard, but yes, we do know that there was an incredible level of sexual abuse that's still continuing. And just to be very honest about this, and this is very difficult to say, probably girls are being held in dungeons and being raped over and over. And again, if you're calling for Hamas to stay in power, as these people in downtown Columbia are doing, they're calling for those men, those rapists, to be allowed to do this over and over, which is still happening right now.
All right, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, truly coming out, and it's being facilitated by the mainstream media. But it's not unfair to say, and it's not unrealistic to say, that people are getting caught in the crossfire, right, Dan?
You mean just regular
in the
people?
Fighting over there?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. In any war, certainly people are going to be caught in the crossfire.
And we've heard of Israeli soldiers, maybe overstepping and celebrating some of those casualties that occur.
I'm.
You skeptical that's true?
No, I think.
Or is it a fog of war issue?
I think that if you're in combat, the truth is that I think to some extent, people in combat, you're in incredibly intense circumstances, and the idea that in some situations you might cheer if you defeat your enemy, even though in a normal situation you probably wouldn't cheer when someone dies. I do think that can happen sometimes, but I don't think it should be seen as though they're pure evil incarnate. Actually, if I could I just read one quote from you?
Real quickly,
okay?
yeah.
Okay, there's a person named Colonel Richard Kemp, and he was a former commander of the British forces in Afghanistan, and he said this in 2015. The Israeli Defense Forces did more to safeguard the rights of civilians in the combat zones than any other army in the history of warfare.
Okay, well, that's a British commander.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Well, that's a good way to wrap it up. And we thank you for your activism. Keep feeding us the stories. We want to try to help unpack this for people and describe what's going on as best we can. So we thank you for being here, Dan Swindell, and keep up the good work. Appreciate it. All right, well,
1.12%. The Dow was down just about 0.25%. NASDAQ down 0.41%. Those losses were driven by losers in communication services, consumer discretionary, and energy. Real estate and utilities were on the gaining side. Futures this morning are in the red as well, pretty significantly. Dow and S&P approaching 0.5%, NASDAQ over 0.5% down. So doesn't look like a pretty day on the market today, but some good news maybe out of, depending on your position, out of Alabama yesterday. There is a small business reporting requirement that was brought by the Biden administration, and an Alabama federal judge, Judge Burke, who was a Trump appointee, yesterday decided, late Friday, that they call it the Corporate Transparency Act. And the folks that have been talking about it are like, well, it's bipartisan. And
it's an old act.
It is. But they added, but they want you to now, as a small business, register and do all these things. So the National Small Business Association filed a suit in November 2022. And the court on Friday said, yep, it has some problems. It violates the Constitution. They had argued in court that it was unduly burdensome, that it violates privacy and free speech protections. And this one I think is really big. It infringes on states' powers to govern businesses. And the judge actually did raise questions and said, look, this would require, even if an entity only conducts business within a single state or no business at all, for it to basically fill out, register and do all these other requirements. And you're thinking, yeah, this does seem like federal overreach for those of us who are just conducting state business or a small business. And so there is some concern, I think, in money laundering and drug cartels and fentanyl. I mean, they kind of try to tie it to all this stuff, and these are, shell companies doing bad things, but really it would ensnare tons of small businesthis, legitimate small businesses.
I think you and I need to do a mutual rant on this after the bottom of the hour.
Maybe.
Because this rule had me so worked up, my wife had to give me a jigger of scotch. I am telling you, I got so worked up with this having to report everyone that has an interest in the company, and every corporation that was registered, with very few exceptions, across the land, millions of companies. Mm-hmm. If you're registered with the Secretary of State in any state, I don't care how small or big your company, you could be a little lemonade stand. And if you've got a corporate registry with Jay Ashcroft, you're going to have to file paperwork and get involved in the bureaucracy. Well, there you go. That's half a rant.
No, that's super. It is super tough. And you think about it. I mean, like, other than my businesses that actually make money, right? I mean, think about the things that are registered with the Secretary of State's organization.
Sure.
We had a rugby team for a while. We have some nonprofits. Those are all technically registered with it. And these are just things that we do as a volunteer.
But
they don't make any money.
A bank account. Yeah.
They're just for, the good of the community. Right. And to impose some of these restrictions on, these smaller entities just seems completely
and like you say,
overreach.
I mean, this is really sort of a small R Republican issue, right? This is about a federation of states, a republic of states. The state regulates these businesses. I'm in a medical business that can only do business in the state because I'm only licensed in the state. Right. I can't even do telehealth. If you're my patient and you're in Las Vegas and you call me, technically, I can't even call in a augmentin prescription for you.
But the federal government.
I mean, but would you play the Soviet national anthem here, please? I mean, this is ridiculous. And it's a blow for freedom for we, the people.
Well,
Thank you.
The Alabama judge is on your side,
Thank
Randy.
you, Bama judge.
Stepped in. I suspect this will be making its way through the courts, but at least for
more spots for vendors and lots of fun.
Some interesting vendors.
Yeah, some interesting vendors, and I'll tell you, I think that
Brian, would you like to report on one of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think
more.
Well, the Missouri Department of Conservation is a perfect example. They will actually have an exhibit of a mountain lion that was, it was hit. They have that every year, and you would not believe the size of this mountain lion that was hit. They have that every year. It'll be neat, but it's
another very man-centric displays.
Yeah,
very
and
man-centric.
a lot of fishing and
the ladies have been talking about some of these man-centric vendors.
Yeah.
Man-centric or man-enhancing?
Yeah. All right, moving along.
Should
Brian.
be fun.
And Brian and John Marsh will be manning the Speedo booth at 93.9 The Eagle and KWOS.
Manning the booth.
A lot of gals come to the show. They do.
They do.
Not anymore.
There's like contests. You can have a beverage. You can walk around, hang out with your friends. You can visit with us.
Jersey Mike's is going to be manning the concession stand, which I'm excited about.
They do a
fun.
great job. And the fairgrounds, the fairgrounds obviously, for people who are kind of newer listeners to Wake Up Mid-Missouri, you don't know this because you wouldn't have known this, but back in 2000, that was as big as roll carts is now. The fairgrounds in Columbia, that was the divisive issue in Columbia, Boone County. I remember packed crowds at the Don Stamper had to he probably ended up losing his reelection, one of them, because he had to pick a side, and he ended up doing what he thought was right, but it was very emotional. Now nobody really thinks about it, but Columbia has the Parks Department, has the fairgrounds. They've invested a lot of money in those facilities have greatly improved over the years.
I asked Jake Tapper to make a special appearance after he said this over the weekend.
Explanation was not they didn't like Donald Trump. They said he participated in an erection, and I have to an insurrection. And I have to say,
so I don't know.
Well,
we'll see if Jake's going to be there.
One year, our booth was right across. Hannah, do you remember, what do you call those loaded teas, like the energy drink things?
Yeah.
And Hannah had talked about them. I had never had one, and I had one at the Man Show like 3 years ago, and now I'm totally hooked on them. So you can also, as a lady, you can discover like new products, and I love those things now.
Yeah. No, it's going to be a lot of fun. You can learn more at Como Man Show. Is that .org or .com?
.com.
.com. And then, of course, only through Sunday. Boy, the time is fleeting on the nominations for Best of Columbia. And our own Hannah, you don't need to write her in. She's on the nominated there.
Yes.
So you just need to affirm her nomination.
Which I think
affirm dear Hannah.
I'm pretty sure this is the first time that's happened. So that's kind of cool.
And it won't
That's
be
awesome.
the last.
Absolutely.
And so you can vote one time a day in each category until the 10th.
Well,
I
and
encourage people to do that.
Speaking of the Como Man Show, we actually have a 4-pack of tickets to give away right now.
Really?
Do a little pop giveaway, not a pop quiz, but a pop giveaway.
I think it should be a quiz.
Let's do that.
So the first person to text in and say the words "Man Show" can get a 4-pack of tickets to this weekend's Como Man Show. That's 874-9390.
All right. Now, I'm taking a little bit of abuse here and I love you guys when you text or call with opposing viewpoints. That's good.
That's fine.
I made a comment.
He says.
You were no, I do. It's good. We like to entertain all viewpoints here, even though they're wrong. But you were talking about Jason Kelsey and how he bought. I think Stephanie said he's got 100 head of cattle, or did you say Hannah? You said he's got cattle
in Missouri.
And I have to defend my wife, because my wife did her PhD on grass-fed beef and the healthiness of it. And I'm talking about healthiness. Talking about healthiness. And it has the fat content of grass only. A cow that only sees grass is a different and healthier fat content than corn-fed beef. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
I'm just saying I've done the grass-fed straight from the farmer, and it has a little bit of funk to the taste. It always does.
It
Which,
has
let's be
different
clear.
flavor, and it's a little tougher because it's not as marbled.
Yeah.
But if you wet age it in a bag and let it just sort of those enzymes sort of marinate and get it nice and soft and tenderized, it makes its own butter.
And we're not saying that there is a wrong way to produce cattle.
I didn't say that. I said there's a healthier piece of meat. I didn't say.
I'm backing you up.
Right. Kale is healthy.
But it doesn't
and
taste
Brian
as good
Hansen
as
won't
beef.
touch kale. I mean, he vomits when I mention the word.
Yeah, and I
but
think
it's healthy.
And any beef is better than chicken.
And I do think, in Randy's, I think in your defense, you're a doctor, and I certainly understand where you're coming from. I do, and I think the listeners may be misunderstood what you were saying. Right. That said, the Missouri Cattlemen's Association is based right here in Columbia, right down the street from us, and they have you've been to the state fair many times, Stephanie. They have what's called the Beef House in Sedalia. Mm-hmm. And I know Don Nicodemus listening. I love the Pork House, too. But the Beef House and the Pork Place.
What about the Dairy Barn, Brian?
Dairy Barn is wonderful, too. I have diabetes. I have to watch it when I go. But I tell you, they make, and I think they are feeding the corn-fed beef over there. I do think it's the corn-fed. I'm going from what I recall. But it tastes a little different.
I go to CC's all the time and get either Gary's steak or I like the steak Sinatra. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I eat more marbled steak than probably most of the listeners. But I'm not fooling myself into thinking that my arteries aren't getting clogged a little quicker and I'm not building more plaque. I'm not going to kid myself about that.
But you're living a life full of joy. Is what you're living.
But I'm also living a life full of joy when I eat a grass-fed steak because I know it's healthy. The conjugated linoleic acid is flowing through my arteries.
For a lot of us here in mid-Missouri, we grew up on what Grandpa was raising, and that was grass-fed beef. It wasn't corn-finished.
Until he ended up in the ICU with a coronary
bypass. But I have a question because I told you that I can't stop thinking about this interview that I heard with Mark Zuckerberg just like a week ago, and he said he's really, really into his health, and so he's decided he's going to start raising his own cattle, and he's like, money is no object for me, so I can feed them whatever I want, and based on all the science, my cows are eating beer and macadamia nuts. Is that grass-fed or grain-fed?
And a lot of that has to do with, you're talking about Zuckerberg, where he learned a lot of that is when he traveled to Centralia, Missouri. Yeah. Who was the county office holder?
Dustin Stanton,
the Stanton Egg Farm up there. Dustin, I talked to Dustin when he came in here maybe 6 months ago, and he had to keep it quiet because Zuckerberg didn't want the media there. I guess I understand that. But anyway, he basically, Zuckerberg was extremely impressed with the way Dustin and his brother ran that. Yeah. They have one of the biggest I think it's the largest free-range egg facility in the country.
I understand they have a shell company for it.
They're very, very good, very, very big company.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's early in the morning. It's the best I can do.
And Randy and I have we've argued off air. So one of my big passions in life is the ag industry, of course.
Me too. I love the ag industry.
One of the things with the ag industry that I'm really passionate about is food labels, right? Because food labeling has become a method to drive up prices and to misinform the consumer into thinking that they're getting this far superior product.
Right.
When nutritionally the differences are very minuscule. Mm-hmm. And, food companies know this, and they will slap all sorts of fancy stickers like free range, hormone free, grass fed, all these types of labels, no GMOs. Mm-hmm. They'll slap that sticker on their product just to drive the price up higher.
Are you saying they're fraudulently doing that?
No, not fraudulently, because of course all of that's regulated, but companies will do that to make a higher profit, and there is this big misinformation cloud that consumers, fall into, thinking that they're getting so much, more nutrition for their price tag when really the differences are so minuscule.
No, look, what's the truth about the whole grass-fed, corn-fed thing is, I think that you have to look at what you eat in the context of the entire plate. So if you're eating a piece of well-marbled,
is this about last night?
4 to 6 ounces of well-marbled meat that's grass, feedlot, corn-fed, whatever. That's great, but I hope that you're balancing that with a lot of kale and beautiful green leafy vegetables and a
lot of colors
and a technicolor plate around it, and very little starch, very little processed food, if none, no added sugar, limit the salt, savor the flavor. You'll be
So last night,
an active lifestyle, that you can handle. But if all you're doing is eating well-marbled steak and playing video games and eating French fries.
Well,
it's not good.
That's a recipe for,
That's
obviously,
all I'm saying.
for diabetes and maybe a heart disease. I mean, because you got to really make sure you exercise. But to your point and to Hannah's point, I do think Don Nicodem and Mike Deering are probably listening to us right now at the Missouri Pork Association, the Cattlemen's. I know they both listen every morning. But I will tell you, I have seen both of them at the Columbia Farmers Market, which is more organic, and they've been there in their capacity when the governor has been there. But they do support this farm-to-table idea, and they do, but they also are supporting their more traditional producers. And by the way, most of those producers in this state are still family farms, a lot of them. And yes, you do have your Smithfields and people like that, but there is a lot of that. But they will be the first to tell you you need to eat your vegetables. They make that very clear, and to eat right. But they will also promote their commodity.
As long as we're talking about this, whatever you do, try not to. This is going to hurt a lot of people. Try not to sear and burn and blacken the steak, because that creates nitrosamines, which are cancer-causing agents.
Give me.
Do you know we have? Okay, I'm just throwing it out there. Here, one guy says, "I'd rather die earlier eating corn-fed beef."
Yeah.
Okay, he's a realist.
Right.
You will, and that's okay. But it's a free country.
So last night I sent a veggie tray picture to Hannah and Randy and said, "Hey, remember how we were talking about these veggies? I actually do it. Here's the veggie tray we put out all the time."
Yeah.
And Hannah quickly humbled me and said, "What's that sitting behind the veggie tray?"
Looks like cookie dough.
Yeah, so logically I knew it wasn't cookie dough, but it looked like a tube of sugar cookie dough that you'd buy pre-made.
No,
it was homemade compound butter.
I'm telling you, I don't care whether it's Murray's or Flyover or CC's or wherever. I mean, crispy, it doesn't matter. I mean, I love corn-fed beef, okay?
Yeah.
But if it's just purely a matter of health and nothing else, I'm sorry, scientifically, and I am science. I'm channeling Fauci here.
But what you're saying is I get a pass on the butter since I also had the veggies, because it's the full plate.
I thought there was another text. Okay.
No.
Well, okay, wait a minute. Some of my best friends, I'm not kidding, Garth up in northeastern Missouri has an international visit. People come from South Africa, from all over the world to learn about his input-free. He doesn't buy hay because he does mob grazing where you put you put 30 or 40 cattle on like a half an acre. You let them there for 24 hours. They compost the soil. You move them down with an electric fence kind of a thing. He raises it. They move down. And by the time they work around to the first pasture, the paddock, it's grown up in beautiful, luscious, diverse grass. Grass.
And I just want to be clear too.
There's an operation in Moberly too that does that.
Okay. I'm not saying there's, grass-fed beef is wrong, right? There's lots of right ways to do agriculture. There's lots of right ways to raise livestock. But I just want listeners and consumers to be informed because my passion is the food label side of it, right?
Right.
A lot of these labels can be kind of seen in an elitist light, right? So
what is this elitist schmeatist? I mean, I could call you an elitist big ag, big corn-fed beef gal, but I don't do that.
Well,
I call you traditional corn-fed beef, which I love. I probably eat more of that than grass-finished.
Okay, I'm going to settle this beef.
But I know my my atherosclerotic plaques are growing. Every time I take a bite of that, it's like, oh boy, my cardiologist.
And I don't like talking about nutrition, right? Like I'll leave that to you.
Okay, well that's my role.
Okay, but I'm just saying that we all know the stereotype of the person who only eats organic produce. Oh, and everything has to be GMO free.
I don't do organic schmiganic. I think that you're better off eating any fruit or vegetable rather than if you can't afford it, then not eating any. And anything is better than none.
I'm not saying that.
Plus, organic often looks sort of yucky.
It does.
All right,
nobody buys it.
There is some State House news today. The House is actually rocking and rolling. Yesterday, they advanced a bill that would block Medicaid funding from Planned Parenthood. And they had an ethics committee meeting. It was closed. We didn't hear anything. Yeah. They've got another meeting on Wednesday. And the Senate was, we don't know.
Oh, okay.
And the Senate was also moving some stuff yesterday, at least debating things. Things are moving on the floor. So
that's good. We'll be covering that as we go forward.
Yeah, we're hoping to get to education reform, I think, is what the rumor this week. So.
I've given up on the. I love all you guys and gals in Jefferson City. I don't know what the heck you're thinking. You have examples. You have Arizona. You have Iowa.